Hello and welcome to this series on chess basics. In the series we're going to be looking at the imbalances of chess. So our first imbalance that we're going to be looking at is the imbalance of space. Space is the number of squares behind your furthest advanced pawn. So in the position in front of you, white's furthest advanced pawn is on f6 and black's is on b5 over here. We say that white has a space advantage because his pawn has moved further than black's pawn. So why is space useful? Space means that you have more squares to work with, and when you have more squares to work with, that means that your pieces can move to the squares that they want to move to faster. They don't have to go out of their way to get to the squares. They can use the squares that are behind the pawn. Those squares are often going to be safe squares for you to use. So in this position, we could move this knight on e3. We can move it to h6 very easily because the pawns are shielding the square on g4. So black doesn't control this square at all because we have this big space advantage. So when you have a space advantage, the thing to do is to slowly improve your pieces to the best squares. The space advantage isn't going to go away in a single move. It's going to be there for a very long time. And because of this, you can take your time. You can develop your plan slowly, and it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to improve their pieces as quickly as you can because they'll have less space. So what if you have less space yourself? If you have less space, if we were on the black side here, then what we'd like to do is we'd like to trade off all of the pieces. If we can trade off more pieces, then that means that the space advantage that your opponent has, so if we were on the black side, it's harder to use that space advantage with fewer pieces. So let's have a look at this position without the pieces. So now there are no pieces on the board, just the black and white king remain and the pawns. In this position, it's completely equal. No side can make any progress at all. The only pawn moves that can be made are these pawns on the d file, either to d6 or to d5, but this just loses a pawn immediately, so it's not good for either side to play these moves. And instead, both sides will be moving their king, but there's no way for the king to ever get into a position where it will be attacking a pawn. The only way to do it would be to somehow get your white king behind enemy lines, but as you can see, every entry square is covered. The square is covered here, and there's no way through. So here, since black is completely equal, this is the kind of position that black would like to reach with the space disadvantage. A position in which there's just pawns and a king left. So this is why you should try and trade off pieces when you have less space. A space advantage can also give us a good indication of how we should be playing our game. Often, whenever you have a space advantage, it'll be on one side of the board or the other. So in this example, I'm going to show you that white gets a space on the king side, gets a pawn established on this e5 square, which allows him to make some aggressive looking moves and place pressure on the black position in this way. So we start off with this opening, which is called the French, and after knight to c3 and bishop to b4, we have this pawn move up to e5. So this signals that white has a space advantage on the king side. This pawn is controlling the f6 square and also the d6 square and more importantly the f6 square, so the knight can't come out and develop to where it normally like to come to. So this is the side of the board that white will be attacking on, and in this line we have pawn to c5. So when white has a space advantage on one side, black would like to get a space advantage on the other side, or in this case what he's trying to do is to challenge the pawns that are in the center. So we have c5, the bishop is asked a question, bishop takes, pawn takes, and here after knight to e7, white plays queen to g4. There are other moves, I believe, in this position, but this one is very direct. It asks whether black wants to have his king under attack for the rest of the game, or if he wants to lose some material. The two main moves in this position are to either castle as black. So as you can see already, white's getting ready to attack the black king. The queen's already in a good position, and soon there'll be pawn coming to h4, h5, and the rook's already in a position to help with the attack. And the other move in this position is playing queen to c7. And in this position, let me do this. In this position, things can get very interesting because white has the opportunity to take this pawn on g7, but black is going to get some counterplay on the queen side. So this is going to be something that we're going to be looking at in the future. But for now, just notice that this space advantage gives white. The space advantage here gives white the opportunity to attack on the king side. Whilst often a space advantage is good to have, it's important to realize when your pawn has gone too far. When a pawn's gone too far up the board and it's in enemy territory, it can just be lost, just be completely lost. So when this happens, we say the pawn is overextended, and this doesn't constitute an advantage. So here I'll show you an example of how a pawn can become overextended in the opening. So here's an opening called the Queen's Gambit. This is signaled by the move d4, d5, and followed by c4. It looks like immediately that the pawn on c4 can be taken like this. And so it almost looks like black has a space advantage on the queen side. However, this pawn on c4 now is said to be overextended. And we can show why this is the case. This pawn can be immediately won by playing queen to a4. This is check, and followed by queen takes on c4. However, we can just develop our pieces, and eventually this bishop on f1 will be able to capture this pawn on c4. Oh, I've got an extra bishop somehow. Anyway. Nope. So the main moves here are going to be after the pawn takes, we will show that this isn't a space advantage, but actually this pawn is overextended. So first of all, we're just developing the knight. We're getting ready to play the pawn up to e4, and the bishop will take the pawn. If black tries to hang on to this pawn, and then bad things can happen, as we'll soon see. So pawn plays to c6, and then we play the pawn to a4. So this stops black from immediately playing the pawn up here to b5 to support the pawn. If black's really insistent on hanging on to the pawn, he can play a6, which supports b5 yet again. But note that this isn't actually a threat, because after e3, for instance, and if black tries to support now, we can simply take, and after the pawn takes, we can take again, knowing that black can't take our knight because the rook on a8 is hanging, and we'll be able to simply take it after pawn takes knight, rook takes rook. And then after that, we can win this pawn on c4. Okay. So now just to recap, space is the number of squares behind your most advanced pawn. The more squares you have, the bigger your space advantage, and if you're the side with the space advantage, you should try and keep pieces on the board to use the space advantage, maneuvering pieces in the squares behind your pawns. If you have a space disadvantage, you should try and trade pieces off. This way, the space advantage is harder to use for your opponent. Sometimes, if you advance a pawn too far, it can just become overextended and it's easily able to be captured by your opponent. And if you have a pawn that you think is completely overextended and it's going to be captured by your opponent, it's often best just to let it go. So I hope you got something out of this, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.